I'd like to welcome back to the stage Aaron, McDonald, Neil, Shen. Where you going? There. Awesome. And also Josh, come on back up. So guys, those are some riveting discussion going on there. I mean, everything kind of sort of ties together. And what I'd like to know, I think as we look at the SEC, all this hubbub is going on in the US. A lot of people focus on that, but what's really going on in the ecosystem is Korea. And then when we see I mean, you think about the population and what you shared with us, it's really mind-blowing from that perspective. So I'd like to kind of bring the panel in and kind of see what that looks like. So Josh, when you talked a little bit about what you're doing over there as far as like the ecosystem, but let's talk a little bit more about the gaming aspect, some of the things you lightly touched on and how you're integrating with Root.
Yeah, so basically, I'm working as a partner of Ripple and Futureverse since last year. And my job is to meet as many Web3 builders and players as possible. And throughout the meeting, we discuss how we can onboard top quality games on top of the root network or XRP ledger, leveraging the unique technologies. Because Futureverse has its own unique functionalities that enhance user experiences, and it has great credibility since it's also a partner of Ripple. And Ripple is a huge brand in Korea, and that gives a lot of credibility to make a good relationships between gaming studio and Futureverse. And that's the reason why top gaming studios prefer to onboard onto the root network instead of other mainnets.
You can also want to get Aaron and Shen involved in this conversation as well. So Aaron, when you think about Korea and having a partner like that has that kind of adoption, you know, what does that mean when you look at the broader adoption of what you're working on, especially when we think about Root?
Yeah, I think the point has been really well made that South Korea is both an extremely important market for the XRP community and for gaming. The largest, one of the largest markets in the world for gaming, one of the highest ARPU for gamers in the world, if not the highest, average revenue per user, and huge holders in the XRP ecosystem. And as Josh said, they're starting to look and get a bit of FOMO at some of the other chains out there. What's going on over there? I can do these cool things. I can do those cool things. And if they want to spend their time on something, and you know, a good part of the national pastime in Korea is spending fun time on gaming. You've got to give those users those options. Otherwise, the grass will start to look greener on the other side of the fence. So it's a super important market to win in both of those domains. We've got to win in Web3, obviously, because it's a hugely important market for XRP. And you've got to also win in gaming because that's what they want to do. That's how they spend their time. And we're so lucky to have Josh up there representing us and the XRP community. He's extremely articulate. His team is very experienced. They're very tapped in, extremely professional about the way they go about building community and reaching out to the developer ecosystem. We're super excited by all of the traction that Josh is starting to get for utility and for new users starting to enter this ecosystem.
Great. And also, Shen, something you brought up in your conversation, it was really evident that we think about what makes a lot of money. You looked at movies, right? So how do you see Zerpmon, especially when we look at South Korea, right, being a huge gaming market? But how do you see some of the adoption happening there? Like, well, how would South Korea look to you and be on your radar?
Yeah, for sure. I think what a lot of platforms, you know, they struggle with when trying to integrate these regions is the language barrier. And you know, especially within the XRPL, I've seen that, you know, a lot of these platforms don't support, you know, the ability for these players from these regions to be able to play in their native language. So for example, with Zerpmon, we've created it so that it is completely playable in Korean, Japanese, Spanish, Chinese, from head to toe, right? Because language should not be a barrier when it comes to playing games. And so I think that that is the biggest barrier that those regions are finding when trying to participate on chain with their XRP.
Well said, well said. Neil, so one of
And
the
just to add to that point, you know, the perspective on the value of winning in gaming is that it's an industry that's got a fast annual compound growth rate. So there's more people entering, players, users entering that industry, spending more money every year on it. And the comparison, I think, you made earlier to the, let's call it traditional entertainment industry, is a very valid one. There's 10 times as much money spent by gamers as people watching movies last year. So it's huge opportunity in terms of the entertainment sector to bring, you know, new solutions and create more magic for.
Thank you. And then Neil, so one of the things that Josh had mentioned was, you know, South Korea and also having Ripple being a good friend. Can you speak a little bit to that relationship and how that's coordinated?
Sure. So I think sort of touched on this previously. Well, people have touched on the sort of impact of the SEC case in markets like the.
Is that on there? I'm not sure.
So I don't. Yeah, it's better. Okay. So I've heard people talk about the sort of impact of the SEC case in markets like the US, but in spite of all that, Asia has been Ripple's most successful market the entire time. And, you know, speaking to whether it's customers or partners, that hasn't really had a material impact on their decision to work either with Ripple or to engage with the XRP ledger technology. But I think the real sort of game changer, if I could put it that way, is games have to be fun. You know, at the end of the day, the platform or the token or the sort of decisions that you make at a technical level about how to implement that game are less important than to actually have something that people want to play. It has to be fun.
That's a great point, and it's interesting when we look at the gaming environment. You know, I've spent, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, you know, for my son on all these different games, and you go from one to the next. And I'm looking at the development and the direction things are moving in, especially we're talking about like what's going on with Zerpmon. So a quick question for you on that. And you were alluding to kind of, you know, moving, you know, skins, you know, within the games. Where do you see the development of that going if you were looking at PC gaming versus console gaming?
Yeah, for sure. I think that you know, one of the really exciting things, you know, that I didn't touch on in my speech about what Web3 can give to gaming is also the interoperability of assets between games and between ecosystems as well. And, you know, even in the future, between platforms and between PC and console and all of that. And, you know, especially with what Root Network are doing and the ecosystem they're creating is it's made for these assets to be able to move between different games, different experiences and different platforms, right? And I think that is something that is just going to, you know, really drive the adoption of, you know, Web3 integrated gaming and all of that, because, you know, the ability for, you know, you to be able to take you know, you have a Zerpmon card which you're playing in the game, and then, you know, the great example was it was within 1 or 2 prompts he was able to turn that into a 3D asset which is game ready, and bang, now you've got your Zerpmon in the metaverse, you know, in the open metaverse, right? So I think the interoperability of assets between platforms and experiences is, you know, highly important.
I think the way that I would like explain the importance of interoperability is Web3 gaming. Intuitively, gamers, I think, believe that ownership is important. Like you said, they spend a lot of time, they invest energy and emotion into playing these things and collecting these things and building these things up, and they exist in this kind of very limited capacity, and so ownership, you know, feels like something that they should want. But what Web3 has done is focused on ownership, but not giving it any power, because ownership without interoperability is meaningless. So, you know, it's like owning a dog that lives in your neighbor's garage. Sure, on paper, it's yours, but you can't do anything with it. And so that's why we've focused so hard on solving the very big and very challenging problem of interoperability, so that it has meaning. And that's why I said, you know, once you go open, you'll never go back, because once people experience that interoperability and we give meaning to ownership, then having these assets rooted in decentralized networks will make sense. Up until now, it's just a meme. And so we have to deliver on the promise of Web3 gaming through interoperability.
And Aaron, it's well said. And I think the way you might think about that is that, like what Jeff was saying, so I know his son, and I know he's a big gamer, but he spends a lot of money and then he moves on to the next game, right? So all of those assets he left and whatever the previous game was, and I think this interoperability is having that ability. Could you expound a little bit on that, how you see that like rolling out as far as having like an asset in a game, right? Moving from one game to another game, and maybe it's not the exact same, but you have your digital identity. One of the problems you guys are solving is that digital identity is yours. It doesn't belong over here. It's not in a silo. You own it and you sort of take it where you want. Obviously, that's the interoperability, but you could talk a little bit how you see that rolling out in the future.
Yeah, so I think one of the big reasons why interoperability hasn't been a feature in Web3 gaming is, despite all the rhetoric around it and all the kind of promises and expectation, is that it's very hard to do. You know, when you build something in this space, you're building for a target device, you know, a desktop, a mobile, a target platform. Could be web, for example, or it could be console. You are building for a target engine. It could be Unity, could be Unreal, could be 3JS. And you're building for a target use case. It could be a single player experience. It could be a multiplayer experience. And so you've got layers. You end up with this matrix of options that you have available to you to make a particular asset, like that cool little character there. And so as a developer, you have to make very specific choices because it's been extremely expensive to make different variations and to make those work in different engines or on different platforms in the past. So tend to kind of narrow down your choices and focus on one thing, which gives up interoperability. Interoperability started to become a thing, and so people start to develop standards around this stuff, and you see these standards emerging, and they're all file-based standards. And so what happens is maybe now you can produce a single asset that could work across those different things, but when you do that, you're producing a file that it's the most average version of itself. So if it works on a mobile and it goes into an Unreal Engine game, for example, then it's going to look crappy. And so that's kind of mediocre as well. Also, if you try and like change something about that, say you've got a character in one application, you want to put a hat on that character, some wearable that you won, that whole file's got to be re-rendered and distributed to everyone who's integrated your application. So it's a very clunky system. What we did is we stood back from all that and said, what if content was just data? It was just a data protocol. And the different engines had the power to interpret that data and render it in runtime. And so we created a new standard called UBF, which stands for Universal Blueprint Framework. What it means basically is that you can take all of the things that represent a character, put it in data, store that data in the same way you'd store any data in a decentralized system, and applications can look at that, interpret it, and render it in runtime in their own way. So you can always have the best version of your character. There's one persistent source of truth. There's no files flying around everywhere. And the user can take that data with them between any application they want.
A question for Neil, and it's going to be in relation to what's going on over in Korea and seeing all this great development. And it seems like Korea has been way ahead of the curve on a lot of this development from
South Korea, yeah.
What's that?
We have to remember it's South Korea, okay? Because
South Korea.
I think Josh
let's
very
be
well
very
pointed that
clear.
out. Do we want to make that distinction, right?
My son was actually born in Seoul, so I'm very aware of the differences between, North Korean, but yeah. So, Neil, if we're looking at the development from a Ripple perspective, gaming perspective, and beyond, what does Ripple see in relation to activities in Korea?
Well, so I guess specifically to across the Asia Pacific region, it's the area of greatest growth, not just for Ripple, but I think if you were to look at global trade, this is, and Australia is in a perfect position to kind of take advantage of this from a just being geographically close, is that there's a huge amount of growth, there's a huge amount of potential, and but there's still that really need to connect different peoples and cultures. It's not a monoculture, of course. You need to still transact with people in Korea and Japan and Singapore and Australia, and everybody has different languages and needs. And so I think it's a great opportunity. And certainly from a Ripple perspective, over the last 3 years, it's, something like well over 50% of our business is in Asia.
Yeah, that's great. And if I guess as a response, from Josh's side, and if you're looking at the three here, in terms of assistance or investment, or what do you see as needed support within the Korean market, coming from some of the guest speakers here?
Oh, you mean like foreign projects entering to Korean market?
Yeah, entering in, overall involvement, growth in the space, as opposed to what's kind of investment and development in other parts of the world.
I think having the quality products is needed first, and then consider whether to enter Korean market or not is necessary. So when you have like quality, like high quality games that people want to use, Koreans gonna use it anyway, So, but if you are to invest heavily in Korea, it's crucial to find reliable partner instead of skilled partners, because oftentimes reliability and like skilled is kind of like trade-off. Someone who is very skilled or sometimes not reliable because he's so good at something, he had like multiple partners. But if you find reliable partner who can actually focus on your project, he's gonna create like way more synergies than you expect. So yeah, that's my answer to.
And we're lucky to have reliable and skilled with you, Josh.
Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, very well said. So I want to kind of get into something else that was brought up as well. So Josh, you touched a little bit on this, Shen, you hit it as well. But Aaron, when we think about the root network and how XRP, right? So I'd like you to get into a little bit, just kind of explain for the audience, like how does that really work? And if I think about if I'm actually going to be staking over there, because we just saw a big announcement today with Zerpmon, which I've actually gone through the process, which was a little more complicated, right? A different wallet, okay? But I'm not going to say, and so talk a little bit about how this Zerpmon integration and with Root and what's possible for everybody.
Yeah, so I think like being pointed out today, this multi-chain idea is something that's really important because it gives the ability for application-specific user experiences, which is what normal technology platforms do. So when you go to build an application, in the traditional non-Web3 space, you'll choose a cloud provider based on the type of application you're trying to build, because some of them are good at some things, some of them are good at others. Or within that cloud, you might choose different services. Some services are good for real-time video versus, enterprise applications, for example. And so the same thing needs to be true about Web3 infrastructure. You need to be able to make a choice about where you deploy your application based on the infrastructure that's available. And if that infrastructure isn't fine-tuned to your application, you're going to go somewhere else. And so by building out a multi-chain architecture, you're giving people more choices about where they can use XRP without having to look over the fence at someone else who's tuning what they're doing for that particular use case. And so what we've decided to focus on is being the best at creating interoperability for content and media applications. And so all of the services built into the Root network are built around that idea. And we also want to be really good at onboarding new users so that their first experience is really simple. So unlike, I think, a lot of chains that have evolved, over the years, we stood back and said, what is our ideal user experience first, not what's our ideal technology. If you talk to most people, and I've talked to most of the founders or projects in this space, have been in it since 2015, they will tell you their core value proposition is something along the lines of faster and cheaper, or smarter. Consumers don't really care about those things so much. And so what we decided to do was step back and say, well, what does the ideal user experience look like, and how can you design a chain that delivers that user experience? Now, one of the really fundamental things about user experience is making sure that the way they come into that system is simple. And if you think about most Web3 ecosystems, the onboarding process is really, really hard. I think there was a post made by GameStop last year. It was something, I couldn't tell if it was satire or not, but they genuinely put this out there and said, onboard and buy your first NFT with 8 easy steps. Amazon's had one-click checkouts for 20 years. And so the notion of 8 easy steps is like a bad thing to start off with. And one of the things that drives that is the fact that people have to know about the chain they're interacting with, because they have to pay gas. And so when I come into an application and I want to use that application on chain, the first thing I've got to do is learn about the cloud that it's hosted on, the blockchain. And then I've got to figure out how to acquire the special currency that that cloud system uses in order to play my game. So all these roadblocks got to start to build up. And so what we did with the root network was say, how can we abstract that? We came up with this thing called the any token gas economy, which basically means you could come into Zerpmon and you could have a Zerpmon coin as the native, in-game coin for your application, just like Roblox does and Fortnite does. And you would only ever need to know about that thing. The minute you start to use that to pay gas in the background, the root network automatically transmutes that into XRP and pays on your behalf. And so from a user's perspective, they're coming in and they're using the application, they're inside of that ecosystem, and they don't need to know about any of the other stuff. And in order to make that work, what we needed to do was have a really dependable token to pair all of those other tokens with. Because if you've got your issue token, it might be low liquidity, it might be volatile, maybe you're growing really fast and the value is going high. What you don't want to pair that with is a new network token that is also volatile and also low liquidity. And so that's why we chose XRP as the core base gas token for that system, because it is, high liquidity, it's dependable and reliable, it's cheap to use in terms of core gas costs within the XRPL itself. And so that you get really great user experience where these users can come on, use this thing. Now, what happens as a result of that is people are using all these different tokens, including XRP, and we collect them and put them in this thing called the vortex, which becomes an index of all the activity on the network. And if you stake root in the root network, then you get rewarded in these vortex tokens. So securing the root network's proof of stake ecosystem, you earn vortex tokens, which contain a bundle of all of the activity that's happening on root. And so as projects, go down, you're getting direct exposure to all of that activity that they're generating within the network, and kind of have almost a portfolio of what the root network's activity are through the vortex itself.
Going back to Josh, and you really went into, I'm really, kind of blown away, by the development that we're seeing XRP wise in Korea as it relates to the rest of the world. What's one bit of insight that you would like to share with everybody in terms of your thought process of where you see XRP going development wise?
I think XRP Ledger, I believe in XRP Ledger's vision, and I believe in its potential, but I'd like to suggest that the ecosystem needs to be more user-centric, you know. I think XRP Ledger at this moment is more developer-friendly, you know. People are thinking in a more engineer kind of mindsets. But no, if you think the other competitors, they're like growing like super fast, you know. XRP has been king for a while, but competitors are rising, you know, because they have shifted their models to the user-centric model, which means that they focus on use cases that users want, not developers want, you know. Developers sometimes like too focused on engineer and coding that they sometimes neglect what users actually need in their daily lives. So that's one insight I'd like to suggest for the community.
Well said there. And I think there's always been that sort of pull back and forth, right? Because you could always say from the dev perspective will figure it out from a different way. But then the user says, I don't like the way that works. It's way, they're not simple enough. I got to do these three things. So I want to pose this kind of same thing to Neil. Like Neil, we've seen XLS20 come on board, right? Out of nowhere. And we started seeing a lot of interesting projects. You know, I mean, Zerpmon is one of them. And what's interesting is how it started. It started as just, it wasn't a game. But this is what you see is how things can evolve. Where do you see this going? You know, let's say, you know, years down the road, and what other, where, you know, as far as how it can maybe evolve, and maybe somewhat of what Josh had said as well.
Well, I think if I think about what the sort of promise of Web3 gaming is, and look at the sort of experience people have today with Web2 games. So there's a colleague of mine is talking about a game that he was playing for a couple of years that involved running around the city of London, collecting these sort of tokens. It's all sort of Harry Potter themed. And he had some fantastic memories of going around and doing that. And one day the game shut down and everything disappeared. So the promise of Web3 is that you can keep those experiences. I mean, it doesn't have to be a monetary value. It could be that it's something that you gained over time and that you want to be able to keep it somewhere. And if you can keep it in, you know, that decentralized infrastructure, you can keep it in a wallet. It could be called something else, but you can keep it in a wallet. You can take it and transfer it. I think that is the future, but it is going to take time to build out that infrastructure. And you know, as I sort of said in the presentation, I mean, from a community perspective, there's a lot of resources out there for developers, but we do have to make it easy for anybody to participate. And I think that's where partners like Futureverse can make that onboarding easier, and you know, the sort of experiences that Josh and Shen are sort of building out, make it fun for people to participate. And that's the key thing.
That's a great question, great answer. And, you know, getting to the simplicity of it. And I guess when people experience Zerpmon in the booth, one thing that Chip and I talk a lot about also from a utility perspective is that the average user doesn't really care about the mechanics behind the scenes, like you were just mentioning, Josh, regarding, you know, the engineering and everything. Shen, what do you see as that simple, you know?
Yeah, well, I think honestly, you know, a lot about what Aaron was touching on in terms of Vortex and any token gas and things like that. It makes it much easier for, you know, a user to be able to come in and you know, take part in these experiences. You know, it goes from a 8-step process to a 1-step process. You know, and that is what is important. And I think that, you know, these ecosystems which are being very tailored towards, even in terms of their tooling as well, towards, you know, how can builders create these great experiences for users. And I think that is really important as well.
Well done. And so I know we're coming down to a little end as far as this is concerned, but it's interesting to see the common thread and how it all works together and the partnerships that kind of come out of this. You know, I mean, Aaron, what you're doing, especially now making it a little bit easier. We talked about adoption and we talk about having Zerpmon, which I'm pretty excited about myself because obviously it was a little bit more difficult before, but I kind of want to just hear from everybody. If we just kind of like just get a one shot because we're coming up on the time here, but just in a quick shot, like how do you see just a quick sentence from your perspective? Where do you see the space going? Shen, you talked about, we don't know where it's going to go in 10 years, but if you had to guess, if you had to speculate, we'll start with Josh first. Like, Josh, what do you see something, and let's say real quick, maybe 3 to 5 years, any big shifts or where you might see it going?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah. So like, I want, you know, one of the things we heard of Shen, he talked about 10 years. Nobody knows, but if we had to speculate in 3 to 5 years, what's the one big takeaway you think it might be? Where we might be going?
In 3 years, in the Web3 scene, it's very hard to predict the future. Like 1 year in Web3 equals to 10 years in Web2. So,
True.
honestly, I cannot guess.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Shen, you got a take on this because we're not going to go 10 years, but let's just say like 3 years, 2 to 3 years. You see any big changes happening?
Are you?
It's 30, like Web 2 years.
That's 30 crypto years. I'll be old by then, mate. I'll have a family. Are you talking about like within the broader crypto space or XRP?
It's really an XRP, right? XRP, you know, Futureverse, kind of like the partnerships you already have going. Like, what do you see as far as adoption, especially when it you know, how it relates to Zerpmon?
Yeah. Well, you know, as I touched on in my presentation, is that I believe the future of the XRP ecosystem is a multi-chain ecosystem of all these different chains which use you know, XRP in various different ways and provide different ways from a technical perspective to use XRP. And so I really believe as we see, you know, the next 3 to 5 years is that the user experience to move between these ecosystems, to move between the mainnet and root network and Zahao and EVM sidechain, that will significantly improve. And, you know, at the same time, all of these ecosystems themselves are building and improving the UX. And, you know, you know, I really believe that at some point we'll see like, you know, a beautiful multi-chain ecosystem, which, you know, you can use, you know, your XRP across 5 different blockchains, which all have 5 different unique retail use cases.
Well said. And Aaron, if you see, I mean, you shipped a lot of products this last year. I don't know how you top it, but let's say you like, what's 1 or 2 things in the roadmap you'd like to see that maybe is a challenge right now, but maybe in the next 2 to 3 years you have that completed?
Yeah, I mean, I think within that time frame, to sum up where we hope things are, is we hope we stop talking about this stuff, because
Okay.
because the moment that we reach a point where it's so simple and so magical that you're immersed in it and you don't have to think about these things, then we've achieved our goal. And like I made the comparison earlier to email, no one talks about how email works. They just wake up every day and use it. And if we're successful, then that's what we would have achieved.
So I think the thing I'm most excited about is probably the immersive experiences. If I look at what's coming with the Ready Player One tie-in, if you've read the book, if you've seen the movie, you can see that is a kind of future. There's sort of immersive experiences where people can move from world to world and take their sort of character with them. I think that's the future.
Well said. We are out of time, but I wanted to thank Josh, Brett, and Shen, Aaron, and also Neil for up here. So thank you guys. Appreciate you guys for coming out.
Fine.